Welcome back to The Explainer. If you were with us for part 1, you probably remember we met the fundamental trio, right? Resistance, capacitance, and inertia. We learned that these are the true physical building blocks of literally every process out there. But theory really only gets you so far. So today, our goal is super practical. We're going to take that foundational theory and turn it into a highly effective, real-world field diagnostic. The goal is for you to look at a trend on a screen and instantly understand the physical reality of the pipes and tanks behind it.
Okay, let's dive right in with a super quick recap, just to anchor our thinking before we hit a real control room. First up, we've got resistance, which is just any physical restriction that opposes flow. Think of a narrow pipe or a valve. Second is capacitance, which is simply the ability to store mass or energy, like a massive liquid storage tank. And third, inertia, actual mass in motion that fights any sudden acceleration or deceleration. Pretty much every time you look at a process, you are essentially just looking at a combo of these three things.
Section 1. The math of lag.
So let's take those concepts and actually translate them into something measurable. We're looking at a fundamental rule of thumb that governs process lags. Here's the formula. Capacitance fill rate equals the inflow rate divided by the capacitance. You can think of this in terms of level or pressure per minute. You use this to estimate exactly how fast a vessel's level will move right after a flow upset. As a golden rule of thumb, almost every real industrial process you're going to encounter is just a capacity being fed through a resistance. And that specific pairing always, absolutely always creates a lag.
Section 2. Slow does not mean broken.
Which brings us to a massively important point about how we actually interpret those lags on the plant floor. Let's talk about one of the most common misdiagnoses made by technicians out in the field. I really want to emphasize this warning. Please don't mistake a slow response for a broken sensor or a sluggish control valve. If the physical process you're dealing with features a massive capacitance, like a giant tank, and it's being fed through a tiny resistance, slowness is actually the correct expected physical behavior. It's not a fault. The equipment is doing exactly what the physics dictates it should do.
Section 3. Geometry over chemistry.
To really drive this home, we need to shift our perspective on what actually causes these delays. It's time to completely strip away that intimidating process chemistry mindset that trips people up and just look at the bare physical realities. Here is the big insight most people completely miss. Resistance and capacitance aren't usually about complex chemistry. They're about basic geometry. A narrow pipe is going to give you high resistance no matter what chemical is flowing through it, right? It's like trying to fill a massive bathtub through a pinched garden hose. The water will eventually reach the exact same final level, it's just going to take a lot longer to get there. That is exactly what happens on an offshore platform when a control valve loses stroke on a separator. The geometry changed, so the time changed.
And we can brilliantly illustrate this with some real-world offshore numbers. Picture a 10-foot separator vessel fed by a 2-inch valve. You make a step change, and it takes minutes for the level to respond. Now swap that 2-inch valve for a 1-inch valve. You still have the exact same tank capacity, but you've significantly increased the resistance. As a result, the exact same level change might take 3 times as long to happen. The tank isn't broken. The valve isn't stuck. You literally just altered the geometry of the resistance.
Section 4. Interactive Step Test. Let's move to a practical application and see how this builds into your daily troubleshooting. I want to try a quick interactive moment based on a real control room scenario, just to test your active understanding. Imagine you're sitting at the console. You initiate a step test on a loop. You look at the trend and you see absolutely no movement for a full 40 seconds, just a flat line. Then finally, it begins to rise in a very slow, lazy S-curve. Based on that shape alone, think about this. Is this a first order or a high order process? I'll give you a second to think about what that signature actually means.
If you guessed high order, you are absolutely spot on. You see, a true first-order process, like a single tank filling, starts responding immediately the moment the flow changes, even if it rises super slowly. But that flat, dead start of 40 seconds, that is the definitive telltale signature of multiple lags stacked together in series. It's the physical delay of energy or mass having to literally push through several different resistances and capacities before it finally reaches your sensor.
Section 5. Stacking the building blocks.
Which perfectly sets up our conclusion. We're going to summarize these core takeaways and really lock in this field diagnostic framework so you can take it straight back to your operators. Here's your consolidated diagnostic checklist to keep handy on the plant floor. Number 1, always identify the physical resistance and capacitance in your loop before you ever touch a dial. 2, Mentally estimate that fill rate. Really understand the flow versus the volume. 3. Definitively expect a slow lag if you're dealing with a large capacity and a small restriction. Remember, slow does not mean broken. And 4. Always keep an eye out for those high-order flat starts so you know if you're dealing with stacked lags.
So you now know exactly how to read resistance, capacitance, and inertia in the field. Plus, you've got the rule of thumb for telling a perfectly normal geometric lag from a genuine mechanical fault. But I'll leave you with this provocative thought. Now that you can instantly spot these building blocks, what actual mathematical shape do they carve into a real process strand when they start interacting? Well, next time, we're going to stack these elements together and decode the exact shapes of those response curves. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.